Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk TV. Lively talk about life, church, and church life. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney-Britton, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Dr. Kris Tenney-Britton, and we're broadcasting from our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of America. Say good morning, Kris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk TV.
Kris and Bill Tenney-Britton here today to talk to you about the invite process. Now, if you were tuned in last week, you know that we talked about the 4 processes. There's 4 things that every church has to do, COVID or not, to grow their church. Invite, connect, disciple, and send, or go, depending on which one of us you're talking to. But today we're talking specifically about the inviting process. How do you get, if you will, people into the door of your church? We'll talk more about that.
Well, the obvious point of the process is to get butts in seats. If your building, your sanctuary is open, you used to measure growth in 4 ways. Butts in seats, how many bucks those butts are bringing in, the size of your budget, the size of your building. So we still really carry that butts in seats with most congregations. That's always the first question. How are we going to get more people into our sanctuary? So that's where the invite process has been. But we have to look at that just a little differently, or think about it a little differently in this age where worship, or our what we do as church, is not in a sanctuary seat.
But we're still, in a lot of ways, doing the butts and seats. Is how many butts are sitting in front of your YouTube feed, your Facebook feed, your website, whatever, however you're streaming or not, as the case may be. But the reality is that the inviting process is more than just getting people to come to church, and that includes coming to worship, whether you're in person or whether you are virtual or online. I hate the word virtual because it sounds like it's not a real thing. It's online, so it's online worship. But there's more to it than just getting them there.
Yeah, so I really want to make a distinction between church and congregation, right? Yeah. So we invite people to church, and that really is this sense of building, this sense of where people come and they gather. But, we asked this question a couple of weeks ago. Are you talking about your building, or are you talking about your church, right? Your congregation. So when we think about people coming, inviting people to church, what we call it really now, it really brings home what should have been there all along, that we're inviting them to be part of our congregation.
Which is a huge and important distinction, because one is about relationships and one's about coming and sitting in your building or sitting in front of your YouTube feed. So, I know that's what you're doing right now. Anyway, sorry.
Hopefully not.
In which case you've tuned off and gone off to something else.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So, but the reality is this invite process is not passive. It's no longer can we do the build it, they will come. We did Church Talk many years ago, from 2009 to 2014, then we stopped doing it. And I got news for you. When you stop doing something for 6 years, it's a slow ramp up to get it back to its former glory or beyond. And the same goes for church. You have to be actively recruiting, actively inviting. And that's the only way you grow your church.
Well, let's be real with this. Some of the churches with which I've been consulting and ministers with whom I've been coaching, they see, a downtrend. In some cases, they've been doing Facebook worship, online type of worship, and then they go back in sanctuary, lose their online presence, and then when they have to close their sanctuary again, go back online, they don't have nearly the followership or the views that they had before. So, there is this whole piece of marketing that gets in there.
There's a quick shift.
Yeah, we have a lot to say.
Put a chapter mark in there. We're now talking about marketing and the role of marketing in all of this.
Marketing.
All right. Marketing. So the whole point of marketing is it makes it easier to invite. It can't do your job for you. The reality is, and you pointed this out last week, is that inviting people is the number one way to actually get people into your church, whether it's in your building or into your congregation, whether it's in your building or whether it's online. It takes an ask. People have to ask. But the reality is you have to have something that's worth inviting people to. The reality is, and this was one of those hard to hear kind of statistics, is that 60% of the congregation, 60% of your congregation are unwilling to invite someone online to attend your online worship service. Only 40% will do the tagging, the sharing, the liking, and that's at best. In my experience, it's way less than that. But 60% say, yeah, I'm not inviting people to our online worship. I just, I wonder why they won't invite.
Wow. I'm sure we're not talking about your online worship service.
No,
I'm absolutely sure. But have you seen some of the online worship services that are out there? I was talking to one friend yesterday, and she was saying, "Oh my gosh, I don't think people realize that people are watching them when they're taping devotionals, or if they're doing a worship from their desk or from their home. They're playing with their hair, or there's the dog or the cat, and petting the cat. So,
which sometimes is more entertaining than the preacher." Sorry.
And then we sing, but we sing a cappella, and some of us have no business singing aloud by ourselves, even with music. So we're just putting out. We think of this in terms of for now. We're not tweaking what we're doing, but in the reality, though,
the product of your online product has got to be quality if you want people to invite people to it.
Right, and same in worship, in worship, same in sanctuary. A lot of people say they don't invite their friends because their friends just don't get it, or because their friends wouldn't be able to keep up or even understand. Some are just flat out embarrassed by your worship service.
So I want to move on to beyond inviting people to your worship service. And of course, you can invite people and should be inviting people. I hope your church is inviting people to your worship service, whether it's online or in person. But there's small groups that you can invite people to. There's all sorts of events. Hopefully you have other things going on in your church, discipleship events, again, small groups, prayer groups.
Bible studies.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that you can do online if you're not in person. Of course, if you're in person, then you're invited to all the things that you would normally be invited them to anyway.
Yeah, but there's some really fun twists to all this. You could do game night. Again, we know people that are doing game nights, games that you can play online. Yeah, right. Or I've been thinking you could play just simple games, and if I'm thinking Candyland or something, but everybody could have the board there, and you could be moving everybody's pieces. But there are these online games, jigsaw puzzles. If you go to jigsawexplorer.com, you can do jigsaw puzzles. You and I were doing, we were doing a jigsaw puzzle the other day, and it was like, you took my piece. I was moving that one.
No, you weren't. I was. The key here is the first level of the invite process is inviting people, probably less into an event. The first step is inviting them into a relationship. Yeah. We have to build relationship. Now, you probably already have a whole lot of friends out there that you can invite. So you don't have to build that relationship from scratch. But if your church is going to reach out beyond its already existing walls, you may need to reach out and begin building friends, being in chat rooms or inviting yourself into some of the Facebook conversations. Stay out of the political stuff. But to talk, to invite, to have conversation, to build relationships.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that Facebook idea that you may be watching. You may have a couple of friends, a number of friends, and you're seeing something that they've been writing about, and then you can say, "Hey, can we talk a little bit more about that?" Not to say they're wrong or right or anything else, but can we have more conversation? And then you can take that to a different place to be able to do that. You want to build friendship with someone and then invite them to something with the congregation. And it may be worship, or it may be not be worship. It could be, like you say, a study, particularly if a study is coming up, and then you're seeing, if you start to gear in and you can see, wow, he mentioned something like that. This is a study he might really like. Invite them to come to study.
Marriage encounters online,
children,
etc. There's plenty out there. And again, a great introduction is to host a game night. And there's apps out there for online group games. So the reality is, though, is that getting them there isn't enough.
Right.
The reality is that first-time guests, when they show up, only the national statistic is only about 16% of them ever come back a second time. Now, I want to say this, is that 16% come back, that's a national statistic. in my experience in the main line, and the statistics say that only 11%. But when we've actually had conversations and interviewed congregations and said, what percentage of your first-time visitors come back? It's actually closer to 6%. Only 6%. They come the first time and they go, not for me. I'm not interested. And so whatever it is you're doing, you've got to figure out how to retain them. Of course, we're going to talk a lot more about that next week. But the reality is you've got to get them there once, but then you have to do something to bring them back a second time.
Yeah, and let me clarify. These numbers that we're talking about aren't just about online, right? Online. We're talking about in sanctuary as well. So my guess is for online, it's going to be even more difficult, and particularly if you're going to go, when you go back, if you go back to sanctuary, making that leap back over there. I can't wait to start playing with the stats for what that is. Well, what we need with all of this to get people to come back is what we call a handoff. And so it's to say, hey, this is what's coming up next week. A Bible study is always a good possibility for what a handoff is. So if you've got someone, you're coming to worship, you always want to be thinking, what's coming next? What can we invite people to that, we can say, in a couple of weeks or next week, we've got this. So whatever you do, you've always got to have a handoff. A handoff.
A handout to talk about the handoff.
A handoff in mind and ready to go.
So speaking of next week,
yes.
Next week we move on from the inviting process into the connecting process, to connect people with each other so that they are a part of and come back and retain, so that you can disciple them, which is a third process. That's next week.
Connect us next week.
In
the meantime, we want to bring again before you net results. We did a special COVID response issue. It's 100 pages. It is wonderful. It's not really an issue. It's an ebook,
right,
if you will.
Right.
And so the COVID response ebook by Net Results, address is down here, netresults.org. You can find out more. It will be worth your time.
Hey, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Have a great week.